Hello, I'm Ian Valentine, and you may be watching this video for a variety of reasons, but I'm doing a presentation on the three dimensions of character as we teach it at the Academy of Art University for screenwriters. Now, the reason I'm doing this is having taught various screenwriting classes for years now. This issue of how one creates a character has proven to be one of the slipperiest for students to understand. And I want you to succeed with it. One of the reasons it's so important to understand how to create characters is that we aspire for all of you to be successful as writers. And the really successful writers write from character, not from story. Story emerges from character, not the other way around. What does that mean? That means that if you create your characters and are true to them as you write, then the story will appear organic. We won't be wondering why somebody does something. We will understand the logic of their choices, and the story will have a greater momentum and authority. But unless the story is grounded in character, you won't get that. Instead, you'll get a story that feels contrived. Oftentimes when you're watching a movie, haven't you had the experience of going, why would they do that? Or that seems stupid, or I don't get it, right? So it's extremely important that you drive your story from character. Now, how does one write characters in a movie? That's the point of this little conversation. We teach a method called the three dimensions of character here. And to summarize, the three dimensions of character are: the first dimension is want and drive. The second dimension is characteristics and backstory. And the third dimension is flaw and need. Let's talk about each of these dimensions one by one. In some ways, the most important thing for you to do with your character in your movie is to determine their want. Their want, this is the first part of the first dimension. Their want is their goal. What do they want? For a screenplay to be successful, this want has to be specific and something they can get in the movie. Wanting world peace, or everyone to be happy around them, or love is not a want. They're too vague. You can't measure them. A want has to be measurable by an audience. Ian getting Gwen Field as his girlfriend, that is a measurable want. I'll either get her or I won't. I will either rob the bank successfully or I will not rob the bank successfully. I will either get out of jail or I won't get out of jail. These are measurable wants. So it's crucial that your want be measurable and that it take place in the movie. Now, an audience needs to understand what your characters want is early in the film, certainly in the first act, and if possible, early in the first act. That's not to say that a character's want doesn't develop during the course of the film. A great example is in Harry Potter. When we first meet Harry Potter in the first movie, he just wants out of the Dursleys. He just hates it there. So he wants to escape the Dursleys. He wants to get out of there. Later on in the movie, his want develops to basically stand against he who shall not be named. In other words, to stand against the enemy. But the idea is his want develops, but we logically understand how that want develops. So a want can develop, but it's got to be crystal clear to the audience what the initial want is, and then as the want develops, how it proceeds. Now, drive, which is the second part of the first dimension, is often confused with the first part, want. Drive is what underlies the want. If I want Gwen Field to be my girlfriend, then what I want is love and companionship. That's what I want. I'm driven by the desire to connect intimately. That is a drive, okay? But unless it's attached to something specific in the movie, it doesn't qualify as a want. I hope that's clear. A want is measurable and attainable. The second dimension are characteristics and backstory, and most students do a pretty good job with this. Characteristics are simply a description of the character, and they are things like, I wear glasses, so the character wears glasses. The character has gray hair. The character occasionally slips into a Boston accent. The character wears t-shirts. The sense of style of the character, how they move, how they walk. Is the character in shape? Is the character ill? Is the character in some way has a stutter? These are all characteristics. They are simply descriptions of the character in both their appearance, their sense of style, and also in the way they are in the world. Now, a backstory is everything about this character before they got to the movie. Every character in a movie has history. They don't just show up in the movie. They've lived for a long time. So even a child, if you're writing a movie about a child who is 8 years old, well, they've lived till they were 8. So what is in the backstory is everything about them that is that made them who they are. Now, the key things here are who are their parents, where were they raised, were their parents divorced, did they get along with their parents, how did their parents treat them, were they part of a large family, do they have siblings, not siblings, where did they go to school. Again, related to a characteristic is how old they are. So many people don't say how old their characters are. That's really, really important, the age of the character. So getting back to backstory, you need to know everything about them. And this should take pages of writing. Key things that people often leave out because they're squeamish is sex. Leaving aside whether they're straight or gay, which is important, or trans. You've got to understand what was their first sexual experience, if they had one. Are they virgins? Are they not virgins? Have they been in love? When were they first kissed? Most movies are about characters who are between the ages of 13 and 30. Most movies that's what they're about. Well, I don't know about you, but between the ages of 13 and 30, I was pretty sex obsessed. Whether or not I was having it, not having it, whether somebody loved me or didn't love me. And I think most people are like that. Or if they're not, and I do know some people who are not like that, it's almost in reaction to the obsession with sex. Most people are obsessed with sex. And even when they're not obsessed, I almost go, it's a negative reaction. They're obsessed in a different way. So nothing is off the table. You've got to really think, are they addicts? Did they become sober? Are they suffer from some kind of food disorder? Most women, in my experience, and some men suffer from some issue regarding food. It doesn't mean that they're bulimics, but it does mean that they, think they're too fat, or they think they're too skinny, Do they work out? Why do they do that? Were they athletes in high school? Crucially, some mistakes that people make all the time that I see in my students is they isolate their characters. They're only children of a single mother. They have no siblings, and even worse, they were homeschooled. That's crazy. Nobody really lives like that. Most people have siblings. Most people have cousins. They have grandparents. They go to high school or they go to grammar school. They go to college. They have friends. It's very rare that you're talking about a character who's truly isolated. And in truth, in a movie, it's very useful for your characters to have friends. So you've got to be somewhat detailed and think through your character's backstory. You'll find that it's easy. Now, one of the things about backstory and characteristics is that you can change them. If you realize, this backstory or these characteristics aren't working, you can change them during the course of your screenplay. They're not written in stone. If it's suddenly useful for you to have the character have been abused as a child, well, they were abused as a child. Then you think through how that, what the ramifications of that are. Now, next is the most slippery beyond want of the dimensions for a character, for students to understand. That is flaw and need. That's the third dimension, flaw and need. Now, what is a flaw? All characters are flawed. I'm flawed. You're flawed. Everybody is flawed. We have instincts and feelings and flaws, character defects. All of us do. And in movies, it's always the case that the protagonist and everybody else, but particularly the protagonist, has a flaw. And you need to know what that flaw is. You must be able to write it down on a piece of paper. And the flaw is generally a character flaw. Now, what is a character flaw? The best way to look at this is the 7 deadly sins. It's not exhaustive of all character flaws, but it's a useful way to start. Pride, greed, miser. Very simple, okay? A character flaw tends to be simple. It's not going to be elaborate. The core element of a character flaw is they're simple, right? If it takes you a sentence to describe the character flaw, it's not a character flaw. It's got to be something that you can sum up in 3 or 4 words. Let me give you an example. Bully. Somebody could be a bully, right? That's interesting. That's a good beginning to a character flaw. But underneath a bully is an insecure person. Being a bully is actually a method to deal with one's feeling of insecurity. Now, what that's interesting about that is that other people might react to being insecure in a different way. They might be shy. They might be very retiring. So these are ways to do it. The way I work on character flaws when I'm writing is that I collect words. Do you know what I mean? I write down a bunch of things and I slowly focus down until I'm getting it as crisp and clear as I can. So a flaw of somebody who's another very common flaw I use is impulsive. Somebody is impulsive. They tend to make decisions without thinking them through. They are reckless, right? That's also, to some degree, they could be foolish. So these are all interesting areas. I keep focusing on it. I collect all these words until I find a combination that's useful to me, right? So foolishly impulsive is an interesting combination. That is a character flaw that can be useful. You can look at why they were this way or whatever, but that is a character flaw. Another character flaw that you might think about is controlling, right? Somebody is very controlling of everybody around them. Again, that speaks to underlying that is insecurity. So you want to collect these words and then sort of stack them up and think about them. But it should only be 2 or 3 words. That's all it should be. And it should be a character flaw. It's something in them. The reason a character flaw is so important is that their flaw is what makes them do stupid things in the movie. Okay? It's what causes them to make mistakes. And to some degree, the climax of a movie, when you're getting to the end of the movie, it's where they have fulfilled their flaw with their need. And therefore, they have the wisdom to do whatever it is they got to do to face down the antagonist. So the flaw is half of your character arc, which is what gives your movie emotional resonance. Now, what is the other half? It is the need. The need is the cure for the flaw. I often refer to it as the mirror image of the flaw. So if somebody is impulsive, right, their need is patience or wisdom. If somebody is greedy, their need is to be satisfied with what they have. It isn't money. It isn't more. It is to be satisfied with what they have, right? So you need to think this through very carefully. What is my character's flaw, and therefore what is their need? Now, again, like the backstory, this is something you can change while you're writing the screenplay. You may decide that it's not that useful for her to be, my protagonist, to be impulsive. Maybe better for her to be a bully and insecure, right? So you can adjust this. But it's very important that you grab and understand this idea. I'll give you another example. To be poor is not a character flaw. To be skinny is not a character flaw. These are descriptions of people. They are not something that's internal to them. Somebody can be poor, and I still don't know anything about them as a character, because many people are poor. And it's not really necessarily their fault that they're poor, right? But a character flaw is something that's internal to the character and often has to do with some coping mechanism that they generated as a child to cover over some kind of trauma or stress that they were under. Now, so those are the 3 dimensions of character. I want to return to the first dimension because it's quite important, the want. The want's crucial because from the want will come your movie's conflict. If Ian wants Gwen Field as his girlfriend, then if Gwen is married or is engaged to somebody else, then the antagonist is the husband or the fiance of Gwen Field. He wants Gwen Field too. I want Gwen Field. Therefore, we are in conflict. The conflict comes from the antagonist's want and the protagonist's want combining. That's where your conflict, that's where your primary story is going to be and exist. So it's crucial for you to understand what your character's want is, even if it develops during the course of your movie. Okay, we have handouts on this at the Academy of Art University. Read them. Discuss this with your professor, me if I'm your professor. It's crucial that you understand this idea and use it as you write your screenplay. Okay?